My husband threw divorce papers at me on Christmas Eve while I was 7 months pregnant. He laughed in my face, said I'd get nothing, and kicked me out into the snow. But that mall Santa who helped me? When he pulled off that white beard, my ex-husband's world came crashing down. If you've ever been underestimated or thrown away like trash, stay until the end. This story will remind you that karma doesn't forget an address. Hit that subscribe button because you'll want to see how this unfolds. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. 5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. My name is Candace, and back then I was 24 years old, working as a curator at a small art museum in Boston, living my best life in a tiny apartment with my cat. I wasn't rich, but I was happy. I had my master's degree, my independence, and a job I loved. Then I met Trevor Whitmore at a charity auction, and everything changed. Trevor was different from anyone I'd ever dated. He was 14 years older, confident, successful, and he owned a chain of luxury hotels up and down the East Coast. When he walked into a room, people noticed. When he spoke, people listened. And when he chose me, out of everyone at that auction, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. He pursued me like I was the only person in the world. Flowers every week, surprise weekend trips. He told me I was brilliant, beautiful, different from all the shallow women in his circle. 6 months later, he proposed. 6 months after that, we were married. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I ignored. His mother never smiled at me, not once. At family dinners, she'd talk about Trevor's ex-girlfriends, all of them white, all of them from old money families. She'd make comments about how different I was, how unique. That word, unique, always felt like it had quotes around it. Trevor's business partners treated me like arm candy, even when I tried to contribute to conversations. I had a master's degree in art history, but they'd steer me toward the other wives, toward discussions about shopping and interior design. And Trevor never defended me. He'd just smile and change the subject, tell me later that I was being too sensitive, that I needed to understand how his world worked. When I got pregnant 2 years into our marriage, I thought maybe things would change. I thought a baby would make us feel like a real family. But Trevor grew colder. He stopped coming home for dinner, stopped asking about my day, stopped touching me unless he had to for appearances at some event. By my 7th month, I was living alone in a mansion with 8 bedrooms, decorating a nursery by myself, talking to my unborn daughter because I had no one else. I'd given up my job when I got pregnant because Trevor insisted. He said his wife didn't need to work, that it would look bad, like he couldn't provide. So I gave up everything. My career, my independence, my identity. I became Mrs. Trevor Whitmore, and that was supposed to be enough. December 24th. I remember every detail of that day like it happened this morning. I was hanging Christmas stockings in the living room, trying to make the house feel festive even though Trevor hadn't mentioned our holiday plans once. I was 7 months pregnant, my back aching, my feet swollen, but I wanted things to be perfect. I thought maybe Christmas morning would remind us of what we used to have. Maybe we'd open presents, drink hot chocolate, talk about baby names like normal couples do. Then I heard the front door open. Trevor was home early, which never happened. My heart actually lifted. I thought maybe he'd taken the afternoon off to spend time with me. I walked into the foyer smiling, ready to hug him, and that's when I saw he wasn't alone. His lawyer, Gerald Hutchins, was with him, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that made my stomach drop. Trevor didn't even say hello. He walked past me into the dining room, and I followed, confused. Gerald set his briefcase on the table and pulled out a manila envelope. Trevor threw it across the table at me, the sound it made when it hit the wood. I'll never forget that sound. "Sign these," he said. His voice was flat, businesslike. "I want you gone by morning." I just stood there, staring at the envelope. My hands were shaking. I asked him what he was talking about, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me like I was stupid. "Divorce papers, Candace. It's over. Sign them. Take what the prenup allows. And leave." I felt the room spinning. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself, my other hand instinctively going to my stomach. I asked him why. I asked him if this was a joke. I begged him to tell me what I'd done wrong. And you know what he did? He laughed. He actually laughed at me. "You really thought this was forever?" he said. "Come on, Candace. You had to know this was temporary. We had fun, but let's be realistic here." That's when he told me about Lauren, his vice president of operations, blonde, beautiful Lauren from the country club, whose father was a state senator. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months. She was pregnant too, 3 months along. He was going to marry her as soon as our divorce was final. His mother had already planned the engagement party. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. I heard myself asking about our baby, about the daughter I was carrying. He shrugged. He actually shrugged. He said he'd pay whatever child support the court ordered, but that was it. He didn't want custody. He didn't want involvement. His future was with Lauren and their child, the one that would fit properly into his family. Then he said the thing I'll never forget. He looked me right in the eyes and said, "My mother was right. I should have married within my circle." This was a mistake from the beginning. I tried to argue. I reminded him about the prenup I'd signed, how his lawyers had pressured me, how I'd trusted him when he said it was just a formality. He smiled at that. Gerald opened the briefcase and showed me the terms. After 5 years of marriage, I was entitled to $50,000 and whatever personal items I'd brought into the marriage. That was it. No house, no alimony, nothing. I had no job, no savings of my own, no career to return to, and I was 7 months pregnant. I asked where he expected me to go. He said that wasn't his problem anymore. Then he called security. 2 men I'd seen every day for 3 years, who'd always been polite, who'd wished me good morning, came and escorted me out of my own home. They let me grab my purse, my phone, and my winter coat. That's all. Everything else, all my clothes, all the baby things I'd been collecting, everything stayed in that house. They put me outside the gate. It was snowing, big fat flakes coming down heavy, and the temperature was dropping fast. I stood there on the sidewalk watching the gate close, watching the lights in the windows of that massive house, and I had nowhere to go. I couldn't call my parents. I'd been so wrapped up in Trevor's world that I'd barely spoken to them in months. I'd lost touch with most of my friends. I had $300 in my checking account and a credit card that I suddenly realized was probably in Trevor's name. I walked. I don't know for how long. My feet were numb, my face was wet from snow and tears, and my back was screaming at me to sit down. Eventually, I found myself outside a shopping mall. There was a bench near the entrance, under an awning that blocked some of the snow. I sat down and just cried. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. I was 7 months pregnant, homeless, broke, and completely alone. This was Christmas Eve, and I had nothing. That's when I heard the voice, deep, gentle, concerned. "Miss, are you all right?" I looked up and saw Santa Claus. I saw a man in a full Santa costume, white beard, red suit, black boots, the whole thing. He'd just finished his shift at the mall, and he was standing there in the snow, looking at me like I was a person who mattered. I tried to tell him I was fine, but I couldn't stop sobbing. He sat down next to me, this mall Santa, and he just waited. He didn't rush me. He didn't tell me to calm down. He just sat there while I fell apart. When I could finally breathe again, he asked if I wanted to talk about it. And I did. I told this complete stranger everything. About Trevor, about being thrown out, about the baby, about having nowhere to go. I told him things I hadn't even admitted to myself, and he listened to every word. Then he offered to buy me coffee from the cafe inside the mall. We sat in the food court, which was nearly empty because most stores were closing early for Christmas Eve. He asked me questions about Trevor's business, about the hotels, about his real estate deals. At first, I thought he was just making conversation, trying to distract me from my situation, but his questions got more specific. He asked about Trevor's recent acquisition in Philadelphia, about his investment partners, about how he financed his deals. I answered everything. What did I have to lose? This Santa seemed genuinely interested, and talking about something other than my immediate crisis felt good. I told him about the offshore accounts I'd accidentally seen documents for, about the meetings Trevor had with men who made me uncomfortable, about the cash that sometimes appeared in the safe in his office. I'd never thought much about it before. Trevor always said it was complicated business stuff I wouldn't understand. The Santa was quiet for a long moment after I finished talking. Then he said something that changed everything. He said, "I think I can help you." I must have looked confused because he smiled sadly and reached up to his face. He pulled off the white beard, and I gasped. I knew this man. His name was Donald Price, and I'd met him 3 years earlier at a museum fundraiser. He was a federal prosecutor, and we'd talked for 20 minutes about Renaissance art. I'd completely forgotten about that night until I saw his face. Donald explained that he'd been working undercover for the past 2 months. The mall Santa job was surveillance. His team had been investigating a massive money laundering operation, and Trevor's name had come up repeatedly. They suspected he was buying properties with illegal money funneled through shell companies, defrauding investors, bribing city officials to get building permits. The problem was, they needed evidence from inside his operation. They needed someone who had access to his files, his communications, his private business dealings. He looked at me and said I could be that person. I sat there, holding my cold coffee, processing what he was telling me. Donald made it clear he couldn't force me to help, but he also made it clear what he already knew. Trevor wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal, and if Donald's team could prove it, everything Trevor owned would be seized, including assets that would have been hidden from me in the divorce. I thought about my daughter, about bringing her into a world where I had nothing to give her. I thought about Lauren, moving into my house, sleeping in my bed, raising her child with all the money Trevor had made through illegal means. I thought about Trevor's face when he laughed at me, when he told me I was a mistake. I told Donald I'd help him. Turns out I had more useful information than I'd realized. My phone automatically backed up to the cloud, and I had thousands of text messages and emails, photos I'd taken at business dinners that showed Trevor with men who were under investigation for organized crime, voice recordings from times I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter while Trevor took calls in the next room. I'd been organizing his home office for months, filing papers I didn't understand but that Donald recognized immediately as evidence of tax evasion and fraud. I gave Donald everything, every email, every photo, every document I'd ever scanned or filed. I told him about the safe in Trevor's office and the combination I'd memorized. I told him about the storage unit Trevor thought I didn't know about. I told him about conversations I'd overheard between Trevor and Gerald about falsifying property values and bribing inspectors. 2 weeks after Christmas, federal agents raided Trevor's office and the mansion. They showed up with warrants and started seizing computers, files, artwork, everything. They froze every bank account. They arrested Trevor right in the middle of a meeting with his investors. The charges read like something from a crime movie: money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit fraud. They arrested Lauren, too, because she'd been signing off on fraudulent documents as VP of Operations. They even arrested Trevor's mother for helping hide money in offshore accounts under her name. The news coverage was everywhere. The hotel empire collapsed in days. Investors filed lawsuits for hundreds of millions of dollars. Everything Trevor owned was seized by the federal government. His lawyer Gerald was arrested for participating in the conspiracy. Trevor's bail was set at $5 million, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't pay it. He sat in jail waiting for trial while his whole world crumbled. The divorce was finalized, but on very different terms. As a cooperating witness, I got protection and a settlement from the seized assets. I moved back in with my parents, and they held me while I cried, never once saying I told you so, even though they'd never trusted Trevor. 3 weeks after the raid, I gave birth to my daughter. I named her Nala. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with my eyes and my nose, and a future I could actually give her now. I started doing consulting work for museums online. It wasn't much at first, but it was mine. I was rebuilding my career on my own terms. I was rebuilding my life, and every day I got a little stronger. Trevor's trial lasted 3 weeks. I had to testify. I walked into that courtroom 8 months after he'd thrown me out into the snow, and I told the truth about everything. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. Lauren got 5 years. Gerald got 3 and was disbarred. Trevor's mother got 2 years probation and house arrest. When the verdict was read, Trevor looked at me across that courtroom. I saw the moment it hit him, the moment he realized I'd been the one who brought him down. His face went from shock to rage to something like disbelief. The man who'd laughed at me on Christmas Eve, who'd told me I was nothing, was watching his entire empire burn because he'd underestimated me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him and thought about Nala at home with my mother, about the life I was building for us, about the fact that I'd survived his cruelty and come out stronger. Then I stood up and walked out of that courtroom with my head high. Trevor thought he could throw me away like I was nothing. He laughed when he handed me those papers, but Karma dressed up as Santa that night, and I learned something powerful. Never underestimate a woman who's been backed into a corner, especially when she's carrying life inside her. My daughter will grow up knowing her mother didn't just survive. She fought back and won. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories where the underdog wins. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. And remember, the people who throw you away always assume you'll stay down. Prove them wrong. I'll see you in the next one.